A common misconception about inner work is that it only works if your environment is peaceful. Like everything has to be sunshine and rainbows, super high vibe, all of that. But that could not be further from the truth. Your challenging environment isn't a barrier, but it is your advantage. It shows you where the real work is. And I had to learn this when moving back into a toxic household after having a taste of freedom, right? So I grew up in a toxic household. Um, I did some inner work there, little things here and there, but I didn't really discover deep inner work until I went off to college, until I was 17, 18, right? So when I went to college, I was on my own. It felt amazing. I spent so much time alone and I really poured into learning about inner work and implementing it into my life. Being there, I discovered who I was. I never truly knew who I was in the toxic environment back at home. I discovered that, okay, I'm actually a very sweet person. I'm actually a very nurturing person, okay? I actually have this great energy. Like, I'm a beautiful person. I love myself truly. My circumstances reflected how I was feeling internally, my relationships, everything. But it all fell apart when I moved back into that toxic environment. Because when you're doing inner work alone in a peaceful environment, you discover who you are, right? But when you do it in a chaotic environment, in a toxic environment, in a difficult environment, you become that person. It becomes robust. The inner work is robust. So when I moved back to this environment, I felt like I had to start all over again. Like I had to do inner work all over again. I was getting triggered and I was getting angry, and the old version of me was coming back and I couldn't understand why. It's because when you are alone or when you're in a peaceful environment, inner work feels easy because you have no contrast. You have nothing going against it. You have nothing actually working that muscle. But when you're in an environment that challenges that, you're constantly working that muscle. Think of the leg extension machine, I believe it's called. Imagine if you were on that machine and you had no weight on it, right? It would be so easy. So easy. You would feel good like, oh, I'm getting my reps in. I've done this many sets, this many reps. I'm getting, my work in. But you're not gaining any muscle, right? Because there's no weight. Now, imagine if you were to use that same machine and add weight. It's harder, but now it's working. Now you are building muscle. Now you can see the change within your body. Now real work is being done. If you can start mastering your inner work in an environment that's constantly challenging you, you're ahead of everyone. You are ahead because now nothing can knock you out of being grounded in your body. Nothing can knock you out of that alignment, out of that knowing yourself, out of that knowing who you are and knowing what you stand for. Now your roots are so big and so deeply ingrained into the ground that no one can knock you out of your being grounded in yourself. Although I loved the person I became through discovering inner work, through being alone, it was so hard for me to get back on track when I moved back into that environment. I hated being there. I pleaded. I was like, oh, I need to be alone again. I need my own place. I need this. I need that. But you don't. Because although I did my inner work alone and it felt great and everything was sunshine and rainbows, it wasn't robust. Wind could have knocked me over. Literally, everything set me off. Everything knocked me out of being rooted in myself, being grounded in myself. I was so dysregulated and I was back into survival mode. I worked so hard to regulate my nervous system and really create my dream life, and none of it could stick in that environment. So I quite literally had to do it all over again. This is why I say your chaotic environment, your challenging environment is your advantage, because if you are starting your inner work in this environment already, you're ahead. So I'm going to give you a few things that I did to protect my energy while in a toxic environment. The first is energetic separation. Recognize what is yours and what is someone else's. I remember I had this ritual, which I did pretty frequently, where I would call my energy back to myself and return to sender any energy that was not mine. A lot of the time when we are in a certain environment, we're like sponges. We kind of soak up the energy of that environment. We soak up the belief systems, the thought processes, the emotions of that environment. And before we know it, we're carrying all this stuff that isn't ours. So anytime you're facing a challenge in your environment, anytime you're feeling heavy energy, anytime you're feeling out of your body, ask yourself, is the energy that you are dwelling in yours, or is it someone else's? And if it is someone else's, you need to release it and separate. This is my energy, this is my truth, that is theirs, that is their truth, and I choose to stay rooted in my energy, in my truth, in my inner work. Another thing I did was spend time in that new energy, spend time alone. I know, especially if you have a big family, it can be very hard to find alone time, but it is very important to kind of establish that bubble alone and protect your energy before entering the environment. So, what I did when I first moved back was I would get in my car and I would drive back to campus. Even though I wasn't attending school there anymore, I really loved the campus. It was such a beautiful place, and I really just loved going on walks there. So I would go on walks, or I would bring a sheet and I would sunbathe. I would maybe talk to some people there. I would spend a lot of time there soaking in that energy, soaking in that new energy, and creating my protective bubble. Spending this time alone is so helpful. And when my car stopped working and I couldn't go there anymore, what I would do is wake up early before anybody else in the household did, and I would meditate. I would start calibrating my energy for the day and protect myself in that meditation. Protect myself from any energy that I didn't want to take on, and really safeguard this new energy that I was cultivating in myself. Safeguard these new belief systems that I was adopting. Safeguard these new ways of dealing with things. For instance, I just made a video about emotional regulation. That was not something I learned, through my family members. They don't know what emotional regulation is. That is something I learned on my own. That is something I learned from watching YouTube videos around inner work. So I took new practices like that and I safeguarded it in my energy so that I could always return to it. Another thing that's kind of related to this topic is immersing yourself with content that aligns with the person you're trying to become, with the person you're wanting to become. So I would drown my brain with people who talked about inner work, people who were living the lifestyle that I wanted, people who were in healthy relationships, people who had healthy family dynamics, people who thought differently than maybe my family did. People who had abundant consciousness, wealth consciousness, stuff like that. I would drown myself with that kind of language, those conversations, podcasts, everything. Because, as I said earlier, you become a sponge to your environment. So maybe you can't control your physical environment, but you can control your mental environment. You can control the content that you're watching. You can control the books that you're reading. You can control the language that you're listening to most of the time. So I really immersed myself in that. I started following people who were had the income goals that I wanted. I started following people who did their inner work. I started following people whose values aligned to the new values that I was taking on. And that helped me strengthen those core beliefs, those core values, those core everything in an environment that went against all of it. Something else I implemented was to stop engaging, stop arguing, stop explaining myself, and just be. So, for instance, gaslighting was something that I would experience in this household. If I experience something, I have my own, everybody has their own perspective, right? But if I experience something, I know I experienced it, and someone's telling me that didn't happen. That's not what happened at all. You're wrong. Our natural instinct is to explain yourself, to prove yourself, to think, no, I'm right. I'm going to prove my point. Da 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 da. No, I would just calmly say, okay, and I would walk away. And it got to a point where I could let it go because I know that's their truth and this is mine and I choose to live in my truth. But in the beginning, it's not that easy. And when you say okay and you walk away, you might need to go into a quiet space and regulate. Maybe what they said really hurt you, or maybe what they said angered you. Now it's time to do emotional regulation around that circumstance. So if you haven't watched my emotional regulation video, basically the framework was feel the emotion, process it. Why are you feeling this emotion? Where did it come from? What's going on? Do you need to give this person grace if it was a person that kind of triggered it? Process it. And then the third step was to transcend it. Step into your new state, step into that desired state. Or if someone is engaging in conversation that doesn't do anything for you, conversation that brings down your frequency, brings down your vibration, makes you feel heavy, disengage. That was such a big thing for me, was to start disengaging. If I would hear someone gossiping, disengage, or say something positive about the person that they're gossiping about. If someone was complaining, I would disengage. Of course, offer, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry you're going through that. But don't actually put your energy into that. You don't want to be absorbed by those kind of things. Any conversation, anything that didn't align with the work that I was doing, I would kind of disengage from it. Not being a jerk, of course. I still have compassion for people and their feelings, and you don't want to just ignore people, but you don't want to be heavily energetically involved, if that makes sense. Okay, I think this is the fourth tip. I'm gonna do about five probably. The fourth thing I did was sound healing. I never realized how important sounds were until this one moment. I remember I was in the kitchen with my parent, and I think something fell or something, and they screamed, and it literally shook up my body, and my heart was racing. I felt my body go into fight or flight, and I was like, okay, that is insane. It is insane what sound can do for your body. So when I would meditate, I would listen to, those frequencies and stuff like that. But I really made the conscious effort to listen to sound bowls, listen to, just healing music to calm my nervous system. Because when you're in a toxic environment specifically, you're in survival mode. I know what it's like to wake up every morning in survival mode. I know what it's like to wake up with your stomach hurting because you're anxious. I know what it's like. I also know what it's like to wake up every morning peaceful, joyful, happy to experience the day. I know I've experienced both sides. So when you're in that kind of environment and toxic environment where there's yelling, where there's screaming, where there's name calling, whatever it might be, it's very important to kind of, you know what I talked about what I talked about when immersing yourself with certain content. You want to immerse yourself with certain frequencies, certain energy, certain sounds. And I like to do this through music or even humming. I've apparently always been a hummer. And one day, this was in college, I was on a walk and I was humming and I felt so calm. And I was like, I wonder if humming does something for your body. And I Googled it. Humming regulates your nervous system. Humming calms you down. So even if you can't listen to music, try to start humming. I promise you, you're going to feel so much more calm. I don't know what exactly, like the science behind it, but it works. I've always loved humming, and maybe it became like a response to growing up in that household, something that I needed to do to self soothe. I'm not sure, but it's amazing. Another great thing, the last thing I will talk about is visualization. If you like to meditate, I like to visualize when I'm meditating, when I'm walking, whatever it is. When you have time, visualize. Visualize the version of you that it's always been inside of you. It's in you. Envision yourself stepping into that person. What are they thinking? What are they doing? How are they feeling? visualize that and feel it so real. Visualize what it is that you're calling in. A lot of us in toxic households want our own home to escape, but when thinking of the things that you want, I don't want you to think of it as I need to escape this environment, so I want this. I want you to genuinely feel the peace, the joy of being in that kind of environment, being in that space, being in that home, whatever it is for you, without it being an escape plan. Because when you're visualizing these things in vain or out of spite, it kind of taints the energy that you're doing it from. And so before you know it, you're back in survival mode and you're defeating the purpose of doing the exercise. I want you to know that if this is your reality, if you're living in a challenging environment and a toxic household, that you do not need to wait for your circumstances to change to be the person that you envision, to have the peace, to have the happiness, to have the regulated nervous system. You can start protecting your energy now and you can start living in that energy now.